Hello, it is Thursday, the 12th of January 2023. I welcome you to my humble abode as I state my intention to uncover and extol the virtues of even more laserdiscs that I recently acquired from. Sorry about that. Okay, so these are more laserdiscs that I recently bought online. So I live in Western Australia. I got these discs from Vintage LaserDiscs, which is an online emporium that's based in South Australia. Most of the laserdiscs that I have bought from Vintage LaserDiscs so far have been Japanese ones. I am curious to unbox the rest of the laserdiscs that I bought. To have a look at what movies they are and what their provenance is. I imagine most, if not all of them, are Japanese as well. But yeah, let's get to it. Okay, we're starting off with a good one. This is a 1991 Warner Home Video Laserdisc of the 1986 movie Manhunter. So this isn't Japanese, this is an American edition. So yeah, Manhunter is one of my favorite movies, written and directed by Michael Mann, based on the 1981 novel Red Dragon by Thomas Harris. So yeah, this is the movie, the very first movie to feature the character of Hannibal Lecter, who's played by Brian Cox in this movie. Manhunter was a bit of a commercial flop when it was released in 1986, but there was renewed interest in the movie once Silence of the Lambs was a big hit in 1991, which also featured the character of Hannibal Lecter, played by Anthony Hopkins in that one, of course. So people sort of went back to Manhunter. So this was Michael Mann's fourth feature film. He directed The Jericho Mile in 1979, Thief in 1981, The Keep in 1983, and then he directed this film in 1986. He'd also been involved in the television series Miami Vice just before this. So yeah, this is a really good movie. It stars William Peterson as Will Graham, a FBI agent and profiler who sort of specializes in tracking down serial killers because he can sort of think like a serial killer, like get in their minds and stuff. But it sort of causes a lot of psychological distress to him to do that. And in this film, he's assigned by Jack Crawford, his boss, played by Dennis Farina, to assist in the investigation involving a serial killer that's been dubbed the Tooth Fairy. So this is a wonderful film. It's very, like a lot of Michael Mann's stuff in that period, it's very stylized. It just has this very like sleek acrylic neon stylish kind of look to it. The music is very 80s. It's just a really great movie. Really good performances by William Peterson, Brian Cox, Dennis Farina, Joan Allen, and Tom Noonan as the killer, Francis Dolarhyde. He's really good in this. A very, very creepy, very terrifying performance. And there's a really good scene in this involving Tom Noonan, Joan Allen, and a comatose tiger. And there are lots of really good moments in this film. It's there are quite a few. Michael Mann he's edited it a few times. There's a few different cuts of the film floating out there, but I think the theatrical version is the best one. I assume that's the version that's on this. Yeah. So it's quite I think for people that are sort of more used to the Anthony Hopkins' portrayal of Hannibal Lecter, which is much more sort of hammy and lip smacking and much more over the top. Brian Cox's performance is quite different. He plays Lecter very much in a sort of like aloof, sort of vaguely arrogant way, but it's a really good performance. It's actually my favorite of all the on-screen incarnations of Lecter. I think Brian Cox is my favorite one. I just remembered the tiger was sedated; it wasn't comatose. But anyway, I think this movie was sort of ahead of its time in certain respects. I mean, we've had decades of movies and television shows that sort of go into like forensics and the profiling of serial killers and stuff. But when this movie was 1986, this movie kind of was tackling those things, portraying them on screen in a level of detail that wasn't really, I don't think was really seen before. The reason the movie is called Manhunter is because it was produced by Dino De Laurentiis, and in 1985, Dino De Laurentiis had produced Michael Cimino's Year of the Dragon, which is a really good movie, but it was a bit of a flop, and so I think there was some concerns that calling a movie Red Dragon a year after Year of the Dragon, people might get confused. There's also some theory that they changed Red Dragon because they thought audiences would assume it's a martial arts movie or something. So Manhunter, it's a pretty generic title, but what the hell. the movie was remade many years later by Brett Ratner under the title of Red Dragon. This version starred Anthony Hopkins in it, so it's kind of like a prequel to the Silence of the Lambs. I've never actually watched that version of the film, probably because I just love this version, Manhunter. I love this movie so much that I know that if I tried to watch a remake of it with different director, different actors, etc., it would just annoy me. Interestingly, the director of photography of Manhunter, Dante Spinotti, did the cinematography for Red Dragon as well. But yeah, that's not enough to get me to watch Red Dragon, I'm afraid. I'm a big fan of Michael Mann. He's made so many movies that I really like. It's difficult for me to pick a favorite. I'm not sure if I would pick Manhunter as my favorite of his films. It could be. I sort of go back and forth. But if it's not my absolute favorite Michael Mann film, then it's very close. It is definitely up there. I think for years, you were assumed to be like all cool and alternative if you proclaimed that Manhunter was better than Silence of the Lambs, because obviously Silence of the Lambs was overwhelmingly, the more famous film with the general public. Yeah, I think these days it's not so much of a hot take. Personally, of the two films, Manhunter and Silence of the Lambs, I prefer Manhunter, but I sort of think the two films, they're kind of in separate genres. I don't really think there's much of a need to compare them. Because I think Silence of the Lambs definitely feels much more like a horror film, whereas Manhunter isn't. Manhunter is more of a procedural, like thriller mystery sort of movie. So they're not really the two films. They're not really. I don't think they're in competition with each other. They're both really good, and I think they can be appreciated both on their own merits. Well, speak of the devil, Silence of the Lambs. Okay, so Silence of the Lambs, this is a 1991 American laserdisc from Orion Home Video for Silence of the Lambs. Okay, so directed by Jonathan Demme. This film it's just one of those movies that was like a huge, like almost instant pop culture, moment in this film. So it was a rare film, like sort of like horror movie, to like sweep the Academy Awards. I mean, it won Best Picture. Jodie Foster won her second Oscar for this. Anthony Hopkins won a Best Actor Academy Award for his performance as Hannibal Lecter in this. So Anthony Hopkins, prior to this, I mean, he was a respected stage actor. He'd been in movies, but this is the one that really sort of catapulted him into Hollywood. Interestingly, even though Anthony Hopkins is in this it's a relatively brief performance. He was nominated and won for best actor and not best supporting actor. Scott Glenn plays Jack Crawford in this. So yeah, this is the one in which Jodie Foster plays Clarice Starling, the FBI agent that has to hunt down a serial killer, Buffalo Bill, played by Ted Levine in this, and she sort of consults with Hannibal Lecter to track down Buffalo Bill. So yeah, this is interesting. One thing that I find kind of annoying about Silence of the Lambs is I think Ted Levine gives the best performance, and he's like the only one, the only main actor in this that wasn't nominated for an Academy Award. It is, I mean, the character he plays, James Gumb, aka Buffalo Bill. It's in recent years, it's the character has become more controversial, probably than it was at the time for certain reasons. But anyway, yeah. So this is a really good movie. I really like Silence of the Lambs. It's very effective. Jonathan Demme. I mean, it was kind of it was a really great thing for Jonathan Demme to an extent, because I mean, he'd come from the Roger Corman school of filmmaking. He directed Stop Making Sense, the Talking Heads concert film, which I think is still the best concert movie ever made. And he directed, comedies like Married to the Mob. This was kind of a massive change of direction for him, and it was a really, good film directed by Jonathan Demme, who sadly is no longer with us. I can't actually remember the very first time I saw this movie. I mean, I was too young to watch it at the time when it came out. I sort of have vague memories of when it was a new release on VHS. My parents were watching it, and I just sort of remember just sort of catching bits and pieces of it. I wasn't watching it; I was just sort of sneaking in and seeing things, and I just remembered cut off faces, human faces, and stuff like that. So it was kind of, it was like I didn't see the movie itself until many years later. Okay, I'm going to have to talk about Michael Mann some more. Okay, so this is The Last of the Mohicans. This is a 1993 American laserdisc from Fox Video for The Last of the Mohicans, the 1992 movie directed and co-written by Michael Mann. sort of based not so much on the 1826 James Fenimore Cooper novel, but the 1936 film version of the novel. It's sort of more it's sort of indebted more to the 1936 film version. I haven't actually read the original novel, the Cooper novel, although I think Mark Twain wrote an amusingly scathing review of it. So the film stars Daniel Day Lewis and Madeline Stowe. And plenty of other really good actors. So it's sort of adventure sort of romance movie set in 1757 in the northwestern frontier of America, and it involves the French and Indian Wars and the British. Yeah, so this is a really good movie. I mean, like a lot of Michael Mann stuff, it's just like fantastic attention to detail. Like visually, it just looks really good. It was filmed in the forests of North Carolina, I believe, and the actors are all in on this. There's all those stories about the extensive preparation that Daniel Day Lewis took to play his role in this, like sort of living off the land and such like. The movie is just filled with like really really great moments. The whole climactic portion of the movie, it's really incredible, just the way it's filmed and edited, the music. It doesn't let up. It's just a really well executed sequence, and I really like the performance of Wes Studi as Magua, the villain, who I think is actually one of the best villains I've ever seen in a movie, because he's just so well constructed. I mean, he has enough of a tragic backstory for you to sort of understand his motivations and to maybe feel sympathy for him, but he's still so hate-filled and evil that it's immensely satisfying when he finally gets taken out. Yeah, so Michael Mann, he's one of those guys like Stanley Kubrick, who's very careful with the projects that he takes on, the films that he makes. Like, spends a lot of time selecting what he wants to do, and then a lot of time preparing for them. So Michael Mann, so he directed Manhunter in 1986, and then he did some television, like TV's A Crime Story, and he directed the 1989 television movie LA Takedown, which years later he remade as Heat. But he did Last of the Mohicans. So this Last of the Mohicans was 1992, which was his first theatrical film that he directed since Manhunter in 1986. So like 6 years between projects that were actually in theaters. So I've watched this movie on television. I've watched it on VHS, and I've watched it on DVD and Blu-ray. I would love to see it on the big screen. I don't know if that will ever happen, but hopefully one day it will. Oh wow, the Blues Brothers. I didn't know that I bought this. Okay, so this is a 1990 American Laserdisc of the Blues Brothers, released by this Laserdisc is by MCA Universal. The film is from 1980. Written by Dan Aykroyd and John Landis, and directed by John Landis. Yeah, this is a movie that it's difficult for me to kind of encapsulate what I think of the Blues Brothers, because this is a movie that I've loved since I was a small child. I've watched it so many times. So it's Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi. It's sort of classic, iconic pairing. The characters that Belushi and Aykroyd had originated on TV's Saturday Night Live. So this is the first. I believe this is the first motion picture like spin-off from Saturday Night Live. So for years, this was probably my favorite John Landis movie. I don't know if it is anymore. I think in more recent years, I think An American Werewolf in London, which was Landis's next movie after this, I think that sort of toppled this one from number one in my ranking of John Landis films. But I still really really love this movie. It's very very funny. It's loaded with lots of great musical numbers, lots of great actors, lots of great musicians, lots of great cameos. It's still an immensely satisfying movie. The original screenplay was by Dan Aykroyd, but I suspect it was whittled down and made workable by John Landis. This is a movie that I've seen many times. I've only seen the belated 1998 sequel, Blues Brothers 2000. I've only seen that one once. That was made obviously many years after John Belushi had died. Considering I was such a big fan of the original, it might be surprising that I didn't watch the sequel theatrically. But I just knew that there was no way this movie could be the sequel could be any good. I didn't actually watch it till I think it was on television, or it might have been on video. I might have watched it on video, and it was more of a case of like morbid curiosity. Like when you have a carton of milk that's it's gone past the expiry date, and that it's going to smell, but you can't. You still have to open it and smell it. That you just have to. That was kind of like me in Blues Brothers 2000. The milk was rotten in that one. I can tell you that. But the original film, of course, is great. It's one of the best and most iconic movies to be filmed in Chicago, and apparently it was the first film that had been filmed on Chicago on location for years. I think years before there was a movie or there was a television series or something that was filmed in Chicago and it portrayed a corrupt policeman, and apparently Mayor Daley didn't like that, so he kind of banned filming in Chicago. Of course, when this movie was made many years later, there was a new administration, and I think after this kind of spearheaded. A lot of great movies that were filmed in Chicago. I mean, like most of the movies of John Hughes, for example. Interestingly, the chapter titles for the LaserDisc are all they're all based on the musical numbers, because all the chapter titles are song titles or music titles. Now, I'm the sort of person who doesn't find like car chases like inherently funny, but in the Blues Brothers they definitely are. There's a lot of vehicular mayhem and destruction in this movie, and it's done really well in this movie. Okay, this is a 1988 Japanese laserdisc from Warner Home Video for Last Tango in Paris, the 1972 movie directed by Bernardo Bertolucci and released by United Artists. Yeah, so this is a enormously controversial film. It's actually just as controversial today as it was at the time. It was caused quite a sensation. Pauline Kael wrote a very influential review of this movie. Yeah, so if we can see, it's a gatefold release with the Obi strip, of course. Yeah, so yeah, this is an interesting movie. I mean, it's kind of. I'll be honest. It is certainly a problematic film to sort of employ a very overused word. Starring Marlon Brando and Maria Schneider. Brando's really good in this movie. His performance is really good. The film is obviously it was quite sexually explicit for its time, quite shocking. So yeah, I mean, is it a movie that I can recommend people see? Given the subsequent allegations that have come out against Marlon Brando and Bertolucci. Bertolucci, Maria Schneider, Marlon Brando. They've all since passed on. Yeah, so is it a movie that you should watch? I would say that's something you have to decide for yourself. Another movie that's somewhat controversial. This is Alien 3, from the movie from 1992. This is a 1995 Japanese laserdisc from Fox Home Video. Yeah, so Alien 3, it's a movie with a bit of a complicated legacy. It was the third installment of the Alien saga, of course, coming after the iconic and influential Alien, Ridley Scott's Alien from 1979, and then the hugely crowd-pleasing 1986 sequel by James Cameron, Aliens. So this is kind of there was a lot of anticipation for this movie. It suffered a very troubled pre-production. There were like loads of different scripts floating around. There was an advertising campaign that sort of misled audiences into thinking this was going to be a movie that would be set on Earth. So when the movie finally came, it was directed by David Fincher. It was David Fincher's first feature film as director. He directed a lot of music videos and stuff before this, and because Fincher has gone on to become one of the great filmmakers, people have sort of gone back to Alien 3 and reevaluated it. It's a movie that I have some problems with, especially because I'm a big fan of the first two movies, and I'm not so much a fan of Alien 3, but it is a movie that I disliked it for a lot of years, and these days I'm more favorably disposed towards it, especially because 20th Century Fox many years later on DVD and Blu-ray they released a cut of the film that was closer to David Fincher's original vision. David Fincher was sort of fired before production of the film had been completed, and he sort of disowned the film and doesn't have many positive things to say about it. So he wasn't involved in the cut that was reassembled and re-released many years later, but apparently it's closer to his vision. And I actually think the producer's cut of Alien 3 is pretty good. There are some deep-rooted problems with Alien 3 that that are sort of the film is kind of stuck with no matter how many times they re-edit it. But I think Alien 3 it's a pretty ballsy movie in some respects, and I do think the producer's cut is, if not a great film, then at least it's a good one. And needless to say, no matter what problems I have with Alien 3, and I do have problems with Alien 3, I still think it's better than every Alien movie that was released subsequently, including the ones directed by Ridley Scott. Okay, Poltergeist 2, The Other Side. I've already got a Laserdisc of this. I talked about this in one of my previous videos. Okay, so this is a different edition. This is a Japanese edition. So this is from MGM UA Home Video from 1987. The movie's from 1986. Yeah, I've noticed they've actually got a that's an image from the first movie that they're using on here. I think that's yeah. Okay, so I don't really have much to add to this that I haven't already said. I think I talked about my problems with the film, although I do like the Jerry Goldsmith score, and I do like Julian Beck as Reverend Kane. Actually, all the performances in this film are pretty good. You've got Jo Beth Williams and Craig T. Nelson returning as the parents. You've got Oliver Robbins and the late Heather O'Rourke as the children. It's still a very likable family, although the movie was kind of undermined, I think, in post production by severe editing. Like the movie definitely feels like it should be longer. It feels like it was pruned down way too much. So in terms of laserdiscs, I have one copy of Poltergeist, two copies of Poltergeist 2, and as far as I know, I don't have any copies of Poltergeist 3, but who knows, maybe Poltergeist 3 will show up in one of these boxes. Okay, this is one of my favorite movies, To Live and Die in LA, the 1985 action movie directed by William Friedkin. So this stars William Peterson and John Pankow as two Secret Service agents who are involved in trying to catch a sort of a murderous expert counterfeiter, Eric Masters, played by Willem Dafoe. This is a really, really good movie. It's one of my favorite movies, one of my favorite William Friedkin movies. It was kind of a comeback for Friedkin in some respects. I mean, he had huge success with The French Connection in 1971 and The Exorcist in 1973, and then he made Sorcerer in 1977, which is a brilliant movie, but it was a big flop at the time. And then he sort of made movies that sort of like The Brink's Job isn't very good. Cruising is a good movie, but it was very controversial and it probably didn't perform as well commercially as Friedkin wanted. Then he made in 1983 the really bad Chevy Chase Sigourney Weaver comedy Deal of the Century, and then he made To Live and Die in LA in 1985. And this is kind of a return to form. This is the Friedkin. I mean, there was an advertising campaign that said the director of The French Connection is back on the streets, and like The French Connection, this movie has a really thrilling, very well executed car sequence involving a high-speed chase on a freeway, going against traffic in the other direction, it's a really well made sequence. So this is a movie that it's very 80s, but in the best possible way. It's very stylish. It's kind of grungy. It's just stacked with fantastic actors. In addition to the ones I've mentioned, you've got Dean Stockwell, John Turturro, in this movie. And one thing that I find really interesting is that it's a movie that, like, on a surface level it's like an 80s cop action movie, but it's actually it's sort of got like the nihilism of 70s, the 1970s sort of flowing through the veins of this movie underneath it, because one thing that is really interesting about this movie is that the protagonists, they kind of almost everything they do in this movie turns out to be wrong. Like they fall asleep during a stakeout, which hinders their case, and then they sort of make very dubious, very unethical decisions, in their attempt to catch the Willem Dafoe character, and like pretty much every decision that they make, like just spiral, it sets off this like snowball effect. Like things spiral out of control and everything sort of goes catastrophically wrong. And I sort of think that an interesting comparison is between this movie and the Sylvester Stallone movie Cobra, which was released the following year, in which Cobra, Stallone plays this sort of like swaggering loose cannon, doesn't play by the rules cop, and of course like he defeats everyone and is totally vindicated as this great hero. In this movie, like the character played by William Peterson is kind of the doesn't play by the rules, doing anything to avenge his dead partner, and he's willing to sort of cross the line, break rules, etc. And like everything he does just turns out really, really bad for like everyone. The movie kind of it doesn't vindicate his actions at all. And one of my favorite things to do with this movie is to watch it with someone or with people who have never seen it before, because the movie, it builds up to a climactic point that it takes a very, very surprising turn that really it really shocks people. So I like to watch it with someone who's never seen it, because this is just a really good movie. Filmed in California, of course. I think it was actually filmed with I think it might have been non-union labor. Or it was filmed very quickly. There's also a really good music score by the British pop group Wang Chung. I'm a big Wang Chung fan. So they did all the incidental music, and they did some songs. And there are some songs from their 1983 album Points on the Curve that end up in this as well. There was actually an alternate ending that I think the studio must have made Friedkin film for possible use, but fortunately they didn't use it. And it's actually a very strange ending. It sort of reminds me of the 1985 Chevy Chase Dan Aykroyd movie Spies Like Us. It would have been very out of place had they actually used it. The film kind of touches upon issues like loyalty. It's sort of parallel between the character played by William Peterson and the character played by Willem Dafoe, where they both have partners who it would kind of be in their best interest to sort of sell out, but they don't. You have like John Pankow refusing to sell out William Peterson, and then you've got John Turturro who refuses to sell out Willem Dafoe. There's a really sort of strange like thread of homoeroticism in this movie. It's actually, I think this is the one 80s action movie that probably has more male nudity than female nudity. One of the amusing anecdotes attached to the production of this movie is that they had to make like fake money, in the movie because the movie was about counterfeit money. And I think they were told that if they make fake money, they can only make it one-sided. But then, they realized you can't do that because, the money's getting like thrown around. You'd be able to see that only one side of it had print on it. So they did actually go ahead and make fake money. But unfortunately, I think some of the fake money sort of made its way out of the set and into the hands of like the kids of one of the crew members, and they tried to spend it, and I think that kind of caused problems. I think Friedkin ended up getting questioned by the Secret Service or the police or whatever. So yeah, important lesson, even if you're making a movie, be damn careful with the fake money that you're making. The soundtrack album by Wang Chung is really good. So the first side of the album contains all the songs that Wang Chung provided for the movie. So there's some original songs and at least one song that was pre-existing. And the second side of the album is all instrumental stuff, which it's really good. I don't think Wang Chung actually composed a score to a cut of the film. I think I think Friedkin just sort of gave them free rein to just compose and produce instrumental music and songs, and then Friedkin just put it into the film where it fit later on. Friedkin told Wang Chung that he didn't actually want them to make a song called "To Live and Die in LA," but they went ahead and did one anyway. And then I think Friedkin actually filmed a sort of a prologue to the film just to use that song, and it's a pretty good song. My favorite song is actually "Wake Up, Stop Dreaming," which isn't used. It's sort of used sparingly in the movie itself, and I kind of feel that it's kind of a lost 80s classic single. I don't think it was ever released as a single, but when I listen to that song, it's like this song should be like a radio staple. Roger Ebert, if I recall correctly, gave this movie a 4-star review. I'm not sure how well it did commercially at the time, but it's one of those movies that sort of come to be regarded, as one of the best 80s action movies. So I think it probably enjoys a much better reputation now than it did at the time. As I said before, I think it's one of William Friedkin's best movies. I think it's definitely on par with the films that he made in the 1970s. The Exorcist, The French Connection, Sorcerer. I think it's as good as those. Okay, Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket, the 1987 movie about the Vietnam War. This is a 1991 LaserDisc from Warner Home Video, an American edition. Okay, so Full Metal Jacket. I'm a huge Stanley Kubrick fan. I have been for many years. I really like Full Metal Jacket. It's probably my favorite movie about the Vietnam War, but I think the spectrum covered by a lot of the Vietnam War movies like this, they're also different, and they, that I kind of feel like it's foolish to compare them. So this movie came out the year after Oliver Stone's Platoon. Platoon was, it was like an Academy Award winning film, and like it won Best Picture, Best Director, and I suspect that it was more familiar as a Vietnam War movie, being filmed in the jungle and such like. So Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket, it's fundamentally a different sort of movie. It's sort of more, it's a serious, drama war movie, but it's sort of got more of a sense of black comedy, more so than Platoon. And it was actually filmed in London, using specially designed sets and exterior locations and things, and it's got so it's more of an urban conflict, which in a weird way makes a lot of the movie sort of seem more contemporary um, than Platoon does. But again, yeah, I don't really see much point in comparing them. Yeah, so this is just a great movie. It's very you've got Matthew Modine, Vincent D'Onofrio, Lee Ermey. The movie is kind of episodic in a way. You have that sort of extended opening sequence, the Marines getting trained at Paris Island, which sort of gets into the nitty gritty of young men, like sort of being you know berated and humiliated and broken down and turned into killing machines. And then you've got the stuff with the Tet offensive and all the action moving to Vietnam itself. Yeah, this is a really good movie. One of my favorite movies. I'm very happy to have this Laserdisc. It looks really good. I think it's interesting. It says acclaimed by critics around the world as the best war movie ever made. And then on the back, you've got the best war movie ever made. So was it acclaimed by the critics, or was it just that one critic, Jay Scott of the Toronto Globe and Mail? I'm not sure. But, I don't know if it's the best war movie ever made. I think there's plenty of very worthy candidates for that title. But I definitely think this is one of the best war movies ever made. The film was based on the novel "The Short Timers" by Gustav Hasford, which I have a copy of. I have read it. It's a pretty good book. And there is a really good book about the making of this movie that was written by Matthew Modine, the diaries that he kept when filming the movie in the mid 1980s. He were published many years later as the Full Metal Jacket Diary. And if you're a fan of this movie, Full Metal Jacket, I recommend Matthew Modine's diaries, because it's a very interesting, very informative look into the making of the film. This is a 1988 Japanese Laserdisc edition of The Stranger, the 1946 movie by Orson Welles, directed by and starring Orson Welles. Yeah, I think this is a movie that sort of lapsed into the public domain. So I think there are a lot of like bad copies of it out there, but this looks pretty official. It was released by NEC Video. Of the movie itself, The Stranger, it's a really good movie, very underrated. I think it was Orson Welles' third feature film as director. He did Citizen Kane and The Magnificent Ambersons. Magnificent Ambersons obviously had very a troubled production and controversial post-production. So yeah, this movie, I think it was originally supposed to be directed by John Huston, but Orson Welles agreed to make it. So it was kind of a work for hire situation for him. I think he did it to prove that he could make a movie, under, on time and on budget. So yeah, this movie stars Edward G. Robinson as a United Nations War Crimes Commission officer who's on the hunt for a Nazi war criminal, played by Orson Welles, who's hiding out in America. He's actually erased his identity, and he's working as a school teacher in a prep school in Connecticut. Yeah, so this is kind of a sort of a noir mystery sort of film. It's really good. It was actually, I'm pretty sure it was a box office success at the time. Probably one of the few Orson Welles directed movies to actually make a lot of money in its first release. But yeah, this is a good film. Okay, so this is a 1986 American Laserdisc from MGM UA Home Video for Year of the Dragon, the 1985 movie directed by Michael Cimino. I'm a big fan of this movie. This was Michael Cimino's first movie that he directed after the infamous Heaven's Gate in 1980. So this is kind of like a cop thriller movie set in New York City. Mickey Rourke plays a Polish-American detective, Stanley White, who sort of takes it upon himself to hunt down this Chinese gangster, Joey Tai, who's kind of like the crime lord that's running New York's Chinatown. It was based on a novel by Robert Daly, which I've not read. It was produced by Dino De Laurentiis, and it was scripted by Michael Cimino and Oliver Stone. The reason for Oliver Stone's involvement in this was he was looking for funding to make Platoon, and Michael Cimino told Oliver Stone that if he would help out scripting Year of the Dragon, then in return, Dino De Laurentiis would put up the money for Platoon. So Oliver Stone agreed to that, but my understanding is that Dino De Laurentiis kind of reneged on their deal. But anyway, so this is a good movie. It was filmed, I think it was filmed in North Carolina. It had a lot of interior studio sets that were sort of done up to look like the streets in New York City. And I think it's actually pretty convincing. Stanley Kubrick was a big fan of this movie. I think he complimented Michael Cimino on the on the set design. Kubrick was quite impressed by it. Quentin Tarantino was a big fan of this movie. It didn't do very well at the time, but it's got a better reputation now than it did at the time. I think it's Cimino's one good film after Heaven's Gate. You know, he made a few more movies after Heaven's Gate, but this is pretty much the only good one. Mickey Rourke he had a pretty incredible run of movies in the 1980s. Mickey Rourke, he made a lot of really good movies, and this is one of them. John Lone plays Joey Tai in this. He went on to be in some really good movies like The Last Emperor and M Butterfly, and the fashion model Ariane Koizumi is in this as the female lead. She got some really bad reviews for her performance in this, and it kind of killed her film acting career. She sort of went back to modeling after this, but I actually think her performance in this is pretty good. There is a recent Blu-ray edition of this movie released by Imprint, which is loaded with extra features, and it's a really good release. The movie was very controversial upon its release. It was it had to face Cimino had to face allegations of racism because of the portrayal of the Chinese gangsters in this. Actually, see a disclaimer on the sleeve here. This film does not intend to demean or to ignore the many positive features of Asian Americans and specifically Chinese American communities. Any similarity between the depiction in this film and any association, organization, individual, or Chinatown that exists in real life is accidental. So the film does have some really good action set pieces. It's very violent. It does use that unfortunate trope of rape of a female character as a catalyst to motivate revenge on from the male character. In the Line of Fire, the 1992 action movie starring Clint Eastwood. This is a 1993 American Laserdisc from Columbia TriStar Home Video. So this is a really good film, starring Clint Eastwood, of course, and with kind of star-making roles for John Malkovich and Rene Russo. John Malkovich had been in some movies before this, but this is kind of the movie that really made him an iconic screen presence, as for like cerebral villainy or whatever. But so Clint Eastwood plays a Secret Service agent who's haunted by his failure to have prevented the assassination of John F. Kennedy in 1963, and then many years later, he's sort of dragged into this cat and mouse sort of situation where John Malkovich, is playing a psychopath who's sort of planning to assassinate the current president of the United States, and he's kind of taunting Clint Eastwood's character. So this is a very good film. I haven't actually watched this movie for quite a long time. It's probably long overdue for a reviewing, especially since it was directed by Wolfgang Petersen, who sadly died last year. But this is one of his best movies. So I really need to rewatch this. Okay, so this is Tombstone, the 1994 Laserdisc from Image for the 1993 Western film. Tombstone is a pretty well regarded movie. I really like this movie. It is, of course, a dramatization of the gunfight at the OK Corral in the town of Tombstone, Arizona, in 1881, it's been filmed many times. You've got Kurt Russell as Wyatt Earp. Val Kilmer as Doc Holliday, really good performance. I mean, it's just a really fantastic cast, and it's a really good movie. It's sort of ostensibly directed by George P. Cosmatos. So the screenplay was written by Kevin Jarre, who was originally supposed to direct this movie, but early in production he was fired. And Kurt Russell, who starred in this movie, I think he went to Sylvester Stallone. They had made Tango and Cash together in 1988, and Sylvester Stallone recommended George P. Cosmatos as director. His credits included directing Stallone in Rambo First Blood Part 2 and Cobra, and I think Stallone kind of was pulling the strings and Cosmatos was sort of like a ghost director, and I think there's some controversy that maybe he fulfilled the same function in Tombstone and Kurt Russell actually directed the movie, and George P. Cosmatos was kind of like a figurehead, just so it wouldn't be seen that Kurt Russell was directing the movie. But whoever directed it, it's a really good movie. I think the following year or a couple of years later, Lawrence Kasdan released the movie Wyatt Earp, which sort of covered similar ground to this. It wasn't as well liked or as successful as Tombstone. I think I read somewhere that Kevin Costner was actually supposed to star in Tombstone, but I think his ideas about the script, sort of led to him leaving and making the White Earp movie with Lawrence Kasdan instead. So I'm actually a pretty big fan of Western films, the classic ones, as well as the more contemporary ones. And this is kind of it's interesting because it's sort of like an old fashioned Western. Like it's a combination of old fashioned Western and kind of early '90s action movie. So yeah, it's definitely worth watching, and I think it fully deserves its reputation. Okay, the last one for now. This is a 1995 Laserdisc released from BMG Video for Highlander 2. Okay, so just get rid of that. Yeah, Highlander 2. This is an interesting movie. So the original Highlander from 1986 was like a sort of a cult genre favorite. Then in 1990, or was it 1991? They released Highlander 2, The Quickening, which was the much anticipated sequel, and it went down like a lead balloon. It was really massively disliked, not only by critics but also by fans of the first movie. And then in 1995, they released Highlander 2, the director's cut, which attempts to fix up some of the problems with the movie. So yeah, in the original Highlander 2, The Quickening, it was established that Connor MacLeod and the other immortals were actually space aliens from the planet Zeist, whereas they amended that in the director's cut. They sort of made it so that they're actually immortals from an unspecified sort of undocumented era in Earth's long past, and they like time travel and stuff. So yeah, I'll be honest. I actually really like Highlander 2 in this form. I think it's still flawed, but I think the original Highlander 2, The Quickening, is a pretty bad movie. But I think Highlander 2, the director's cut, is an improvement, and it's not a great movie, but I think it's not a terrible movie. And sometimes that's all you want from an action sequel. So this has got Christopher Lambert, Sean Connery, Michael Ironside plays the villain in this, General Katana. Virginia Madsen is the love interest, and John C. McGinley is like the sniveling sort of backup villain. The music's it's not by Queen. The music's by Stuart Copeland of The Police. Yeah, and it's sort of set in different time zones, and there's all this stuff to do with the environment and the ozone layer and evil corporations, and it's like this weird mix of like the first movie is it's got stuff in the first movie like in terms of characters and ideas, but it also has a lot of like kind of dystopian cyberpunk sort of stuff as well. And it's also interesting because one of those movies where like Tim Burton's Batman, and I guess even the Super Mario movie, is like one of those movies where like they sort of erected massive interior sound stages. They erected like massive exterior street scenes that were all done indoors, and you kind of don't really see that much anymore. It's kind of still kind of interesting to see. So yeah, this movie. It's sort of like, I guess it's a guilty pleasure. I do enjoy watching Highlander 2. I can watch the original version and sort of laugh my ass off at it, and this version I can sort of watch and still kind of giggle at it, but not I don't regard it so much as a bad movie as the original version. Highlander 2 was directed by an Australian, Russell Mulcahy, who also directed the original Highlander. So after this, there was Highlander 3, The Sorcerer, which pretty much ignored this one. Like Highlander 2 was like retconned out of existence, and Highlander 3 is pretty much a flaccid remake of the original Highlander. There are some amusing stories attached to the production of this movie. So Clancy Brown, who played the Kurgan in the original Highlander, was sort of asked to appear in the sequel, and he read the script, and he didn't want anything to do with this. He, in an interview some years ago, he said, they weren't paying him enough to be in this movie. He said he would do quality for no money, or he would do shit for good money, but he wouldn't do shit for no money. He said something like that. I'm sure he said it much better than that. But yeah, Virginia Madsen was asked to comment on her involvement in this movie, and like what's really cool is like she didn't look down on it. She just remembered they filmed this movie in Argentina, so she just remembers just having a great time in Argentina, like hanging out with Sean Connery and just like going just the food and the drink being really good. So it's like, yeah, I mean, who cares if the movie itself turned out to be a bit of a turkey? Like, if you got pleasant memories of making it, what the hell? I think Michael Ironside actually really liked this movie as well. I think he said that having long hair, he really liked having long hair in this movie. So yeah, the movie, it had a very troubled production. It was filmed in Argentina, and I think Argentina, like I don't know what financial turmoil the country was going through at the time, but there was like massive the money ran out on this film, or they couldn't, they had to stop filming, and so they kind of didn't really get to finish the movie. In the original version of this Highlander 2, The Quickening, they actually the movie is very nonsensical. They actually spliced together two completely different battle sequences in the movie, and if you know that, you watch the movie and like there's a battle where the location changes from like a dank warehouse into like a high-tech installation, and like Connor McLeod's sword changes between scenes because he had his own sword in one fight sequence and Sean Connery's sword in another fight sequence, and in the cut of the original cut of this movie, they spliced it together, so his weapon changes from scene to scene. But the original the director's cut of Highlander does resolve some of those editing difficulties. It does re-edit the film into a form that makes a lot more sense. So that's all for now. I really need some coffee.